Yes, what's going on, people? Villan Noir here, Julian here to speak to you today on this good Wednesday. Listen, before I go into anything, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Really enjoying the comments, loving the engagement. Love to hear what you're having to say about all things Aston Villa in this season. Listen, Unai Emery has spoken for the first time publicly since his post-match interview after the Sunderland game, and it is telling what he's saying, especially in light of the Monchi move and Alabe coming in. So, in his pre-match presser, so in the pre-match presser before the Europa League game tomorrow against Bologna, Emery was quoted as saying, so this is from Jacob Tanswell, who is a Villa insider, and I think what Emery has said, there's a lot of things that he said. You know, him and Ezri Konsa sat down with the media today, and a lot of what they've said is quite telling about how the team feels at the moment. And I think, you know, obviously their job is to not give any thoughts or feelings that make us feel unnerved or anything like that as Villa fans. But it's very clear that the players do feel a responsibility. I think Ezri Konsa did a great job in explaining that and actually showing that the players obviously do feel that something's wrong, and the players do know that they have a responsibility to change that. But something that Jacob Tanswell, Villa Insider, said, he quoted Emery from this presser this afternoon, and let's have a look at what he said. So this is, you know, as I said, this is one thing that Emery said in light of everything that's been going on. Right. He says, Emery, we started the season with the problems that we have with the transfer window and players joining us late. We are trying to recover as soon as possible our performance. More than the result, we are improving. It's not enough because we didn't achieve the victory. Second part to that says, but in the last 3 away matches, we've drawn. And Crystal Palace this season was the only match I think we were very poor emotionally. I think that speaks volumes about how he was feeling. And you know what? Gives some insight to maybe the reason why Monchi was left go. It's very clear that he wasn't happy with either the signings that we made or the timing of the signings. You know, making 3 last-minute signings on the deadline day of the transfer window doesn't give teams enough time to gel, doesn't give teams enough time to get to know each other. And, you know, where we could have benefited from these same players or other players coming in earlier, you know, to be able to have a pre-season. You know, we're effectively, you know, having a pre-season now within the season, which doesn't, you know, it's not going to work, is it? It's not really going to give the best opportunity for players to get to know each other, for the tactics and the style that the manager wants to impose on the team to actually come to fruition. So it's very clearly saying that, you know, we're effectively having a pre-season now. We're effectively trying to get where other teams are further ahead in terms of the chemistry and the cohesion. We're doing this whilst playing games and whilst playing quite a few number of games as well. And naturally, that's not going to be perfect all the time. You know, when they talk about the stages of performance for a team, I think it's forming, norming, storming, performing. So, you know, we're very much in the forming stage. You know, all these players are coming in. You know, it changes the locker room. It changes the dressing room, sorry. It changes dynamics. You know, you've got players that are coming from big clubs who may have an ideology about how they play coming in, and it can change things. So naturally, he's saying that, you know, we're behind, and maybe there was some dismay from Unai Emery in terms of the lack of movement in the transfer window from Monchi, which might give more reason to why this decision was made for Monchi to move on and for Alabe to come in. And, you know, as much as we've all been quite dismayed with the results, you know, he did say something quite poignant here about, you know, we're trying to recover our performances. You know, we're trying to see the results, but he used the word recover. So he recognizes that there's been a drop off. And I'm glad in one sense that he is recognizing that, because it would be very disheartening for me anyway if he was clearly completely off with the fairies and wasn't recognizing that something was wrong. So that's given me some hope that maybe there's things happening behind the scenes where things are being addressed well. And, and I think he was quite measured in this response in talking about, we are improving. And I think if you watch my midweek mashup from yesterday, you'll see that I can see that Unai's trying to adjust things. Things are just not happening at the right pace that we want. We are 5 games into the Premier League season. We have been knocked out of the Carabao Cup. But there's 33 more games in the Premier League. And I'm not trying to say this to negate the truth that, if we get to mid-October, early November and things haven't changed, that we're in a bit of a bother. But there's so much more of the season ahead. So I'm praying and hoping that, tomorrow against Bologna, we're good to go. It would be great to get a victory. Unai said it's not enough because we didn't achieve the victory. He's recognizing that without a victory, it feels like nothing is changing. And, if we're honest as Villa fans, we can recognize that, last year, one of our biggest problems is that we couldn't even keep a clean sheet. Last year, we were leaking goals. And in fairness, that's kind of slowed down a little bit. I know that's been caveated with no goals on the other end. But there obviously certain things have been addressed. The deal is that we need to be a bit more clinical in the final third. And I'm praying, well, I'm not praying, I keep saying I'm praying. I'm just hoping that something changes. Maybe there's just a little tweak in the attacking sense for us to get going. And to be honest, I really do think there's a massive onus on Ollie Watkins or whoever is our front man to just bring some spark, bring some a clinical nature to our attack. Yesterday I was watching some highlights from the Champions League last year and just saw how clinical John Duran was. And that's the difference between, which is why I never agreed with Duran being sold, because I felt like he was a bit more of a clinical finisher than Ollie Watkins. And in a team like Villa, where especially now, chances are coming few and far between, you need that. And that's the difference between a draw and a loss. That's the difference between a draw and a win. That ability that you can take this chance and put it in the back of the net. You can't afford to have a striker or a front man that has no clinical nature about him. We don't need you to have 4, 5, 6 chances for you to get 1 goal. We need to see you get bagging goals every 2 or 3 chances at the very most. So it's very clear that Emery is aware. He's trying to be as diplomatic as possible in terms of recognizing that, we haven't necessarily, or he's saying we haven't necessarily had any poor performances in terms of overall. We would say differently as Villa fans because we expect better, because we've seen better. But I do think he's the right man at the minute for the job to kind of get us out of this funk. So let's hope that there's some clear changes in tomorrow's game. Let's hope we see something that is clearly demonstrating a shifting in the mindset. And as Villa fans, we just got to get behind the boys, man. I'm hoping that the atmosphere tomorrow at Villa Park is very similar to that of last year against Bayern Munich. The first Champions League game in years. Let's get behind the boys. I believe that we can be the 12th man. So let's get cracking. If you are going to be in the house tomorrow at Villa Park, let's get behind the boys, man, and let's see it come through. Let's see it to the end, and let's get that win. All right. As always, this is Villa in Noir, and as always, up the Villa. Peace.